Hiya, today I'm going to talk a bit about the pelvic floor. So this is just a fairly short session. We're going to talk about where it is, how it works, but also do a few exercises where you work the pelvic floor without even having to think about it, which is the best kind. However, what I will preface that with is saying that if you experience any pain in your pelvic floor, that you don't do these exercises. You really need to see a women's health physio before doing these exercises, assuming you're a woman, obviously. So even if you suffer from any level of incontinence, if doing pelvic floor exercises causes pain, then it might well be that that's the wrong thing for you to do. So in that case, don't do these exercises. So in terms of where is the pelvic floor, we know that it's underneath the pelvis. In fact, it is sitting underneath the pelvis from the pubic bone at the front to the tailbone at the back and to the sit bones at either side. So if you can imagine the pelvic floor like a little basin and that everything sits in it. However, if you imagine it like a little basin with everything sitting in it, then that gives you a very clear image in your head of the downward pressure. So your organs should be supported by ligaments, and that should take some pressure off your pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor is a muscle, so it should be toned, and that in itself will offer some support. The other thing is that the pelvic floor is a diaphragm, so if you can imagine, it's actually more like that. It's more concave, and if you can visualize the diaphragm underneath the base of the rib cage so that that is also concave, you've got that same thing happening in the pelvic floor at the bottom of the pelvis. So when you breathe out, your diaphragm moves up because the lungs empty, and that creates space in the abdomen, and obviously the organs have got some space to move up there a little bit as well. So when you breathe out, the pelvic floor diaphragm does the same thing. It becomes concave. Get that the right way around. So we're going to start just by breathing, and not really by doing anything significantly different. If you're not comfy, by the way, sitting on the floor, you can do this sitting in a chair at this point just as well. So sit in a comfortable position. Now it might well be that in a seated position this doesn't really work for you, and we're going to try different positions as we go along. So think about breathing in, just very gently, and breathing out. Yeah, and I want you to focus a little bit more on the breathing out phase. And I want you to visualise this diaphragm at the base of the rib cage. So as we breathe in, as we inhale, that diaphragm, as the lungs expand, the rib cage expands, that diaphragm goes down. And as you breathe out, that diaphragm goes up. And the more we breathe out, the further up it goes. So that is assisting with respiration, with emptying the lungs, amongst other things. Other muscles, obviously, like the intercostals, etc., helping you to breathe. So the abdominal wall is part of that. As you breathe out, the abdominal wall should connect and add a little bit of tension so that that assists, the diaphragm goes up and it creates some space, and the pelvic floor also goes up. And what often happens as we exercise is that we kind of brace and push the abdominal wall out, maybe even hold our breath and actually put pressure on the pelvic floor. So what we want to get is that sense of breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, diaphragms go down, breathe out, diaphragms lift up. So if I can just get you to continue to take a few gentle breaths for me. And I've got that visualisation in my mind of like an umbrella shape. Yeah, so if you can visualise an umbrella shape for the base of the rib cage where the diaphragm sits. As you breathe in, that umbrella flattens, the wind's just blowing it the wrong way out, and as you breathe out, it lifts up. So let's think about that same umbrella shape, breathing in and breathing out, and lift up. Yeah. Now as you do that, if you can feel some activity in the deep abdominals, that's all good too. I don't want you to necessarily consciously think about the abdominals, just let them work. And the pelvic floor, again, it doesn't work in isolation. It works with the deep abdominals, it works with the diaphragm. So working it in isolation is not really a very kind of a natural or functional thing to do, but it might be a way just to get that connection with the pelvic floor and become more aware of the pelvic floor. So as we're sitting now, if you can visualise your sitting bones, whether you're on a chair or the floor, you can probably feel your sitting bones digging a hole in there. And if you can think about your pelvic floor, if that's one sitting bone and that's the other sitting bone, and breathing in for nothing, breathe out and lift between the sitting bones, and breathe in, imagine you're letting the pelvic floor relax down towards the floor or the chair, and breathe out and lift between the sitting bones. So we're just going to do a couple more breaths like that. Breathe in and breathe out and breathe in, and I'm breathing loudly just so you can hear me. You don't have to do it. Breathing in, think about the pelvic floor gently relaxing down. Breathing out, think about lifting up. Now hopefully you've noticed that as I was breathing then, my body wasn't moving, I wasn't popping up and down, because what I'm not doing is connecting the superficial muscles. I'm not squeezing them with my bottom, I'm not moving my legs. It's purely deep muscles which you can't see. Yeah, so I want you to be very aware that while you're doing pelvic floor exercises and intentionally focusing on isolating the pelvic floor, that nothing else is actually working. We're breathing, obviously, but we're not intentionally tensing the glutes, tensing the thighs, not intentionally tensing the abdominals, but they might tense a little bit. So if you can think about that 3D breath for me, just doing a couple more breaths, breathing in, belly relaxes. Rib cage expands at the side, rib cage expands at the back, pelvic floor is relaxing, we're actively relaxing. And as you breathe out, ribs come in, belly comes in, the back of the rib cage pulls in, the pelvic floor draws up, and we breathe in and breathe out. And breathe in and breathe out. Lovely, one more time, and the arm movement is incidental also. And breathe out, lovely. So that's consciously contracting your pelvic floor, and it might well be that for you at this point you didn't feel a great deal happening. And again, when you're particularly seated, you might not, because all of your viscera and your abdominal contents are sitting on your pelvic floor, so it's definitely moving there against gravity if it's moving at all. So we're going to work in a few different positions, and I've got a few bits of equipment here. Pad if you need anything for your head or for your knees, mat obviously, and I have a circle and a ball. So if you've not got one, you might have the other. This is not, it's not possibly as big as I would use in the studio, but it doesn't want to be particularly smaller than this one. So we're going to start in all fours position, but before we do, hang on, I've got my visual aid. Here's one I made earlier. I feel like I've been on Blue Peter. So do you remember these from school? You used to write all kinds of things in here and pick up the flap to get your answer. If you can visualise it this way round, then I have, as that's open, if I can keep hold of it, pubic bone, tailbone, sitting bone, yeah? And it sits, as I'm sitting now, it's sitting like that on the floor. Front of the pelvis, back of the pelvis, and the sitting bones at either side. So another way that you might be able to visualise engaging your pelvic floor is that sensation of drawing the four corners together. And it might be, this isn't the easiest thing to do it with because all corners tend to move, it might be that you're thinking about drawing the two sides closer together. It might be that you're thinking about drawing the front and the back closer together. Obviously the sides are moving as well in my visual aid. And it might be that in a seated position, you can imagine, this is a little bit like one of those, I don't know what they call them, on a digger, you know, when they're digging earth out, that you're going to go down and we are closing the pelvic floor and lifting up. So if I'd been better organised, I would have had a tissue. What I've actually got is a flannel. Hang on, because I'm going to use these in my next session. So here I have a bit of old flannel, and I'm going to pick it up. Yeah, so we breathe in, relax and open the pelvic floor. Breathe out, imagine you're trying to lift that flannel off the ground. Now if it helps you, sit on it, absolutely fine. If it helps you to sit on something a bit thicker, sit on a cushion, that's all absolutely fine. But what we're thinking about is pubic bone, tailbone, sit bone, yeah? So you might think sit bone to sit bone and pick up and release, yeah? You might think tailbone to pubic bone and pick up, I've missed it, and release, yeah? So just to give you that idea of the sensation of those four corners moving closer together. So the reason that I've got this out at this point is because the next movement we do is really focusing on those sit bones, right to left, and I want you to visualise the pelvic floor opening and closing. Sit bones apart, sit bones together, okay? And the way we're going to do that is in an all fours position. So again, if your knees are uncomfortable, pop a pad under your knees, hands under your shoulders, shoulder width, knees under your hips. Remember, if your wrists are uncomfortable, you could rest on your knuckles, you could rest on your elbows. And all we're going to do is point your tailbone up to the ceiling and then tuck your tailbone under. So we go tailbone up, breathe in, tailbone under, breathe out, tailbone up. Now, in this position, one of the difficulties with this particular movement is there's a real temptation to squeeze your glutes and use your glutes. So if I can get you to try not to do that, but what I want you to do is visualise your sit bones, so right and left around here somewhere, and when I point my tailbone up towards the ceiling, I've got that sensation of my sit bones moving away from each other. And when I tuck under, I've got that sensation of the sit bones moving closer together. Now, physically, your sit bones are not moving, but what is happening is the pelvic floor is getting some connection there, and it's actually getting to relax and release there. And we need the pelvic floor to be able to do both of those things. So we tuck under, and you may even feel, again, you might feel that connection in the abdominal wall at the same time. So here, glutes relaxed, we are using the pelvic floor just in that pelvic tilt. And again, remember, stay in a range that's comfortable for you. If you're not comfy to tuck right under, don't tuck right under. If you're not comfy to point your tailbone right up to the roof, don't go that far. What we're not looking for is thoracic flexion. So just do a couple more and relax there. Lovely. So we've been thinking about opening and closing the sit bones and moving them away from each other and towards each other. And again, physically they don't actually move away from each other and towards each other, but it's a brilliant opportunity to get that sensation of the pelvic floor closing and opening. So the next thing we're going to do is go into a supine position. So we're going onto our backs, and again we're going to focus on the breath to start with, and then we're going to move on. So first thing is breathing and thinking about lifting through that pelvic floor, but we're going to just get the breath first. So please remember, if you have any back issues, knees together, come onto one side, come down carefully. And as we come on to your back, make sure your neck's comfortable. If it's not, pop a cushion under your head. Generous 90 degrees at your knees, and we're in a neutral position or thereabouts, yeah? So bottom is relaxed, legs are relaxed. We're just going to take a breath and breathe out. So we're thinking about that 3D breath again. Can we breathe in? Let the ribs lift at the front, the sides, spread at the back, let the belly fill up. And breathe out, still 3D. We're drawing the ribs in, we're drawing the belly in. Yeah, so let's do that again. Breathe in wide. Breathe out, get smaller around the trunk. Now you might already find that you are aware that your pelvic floor is doing the same thing. That as we draw in here, we draw up quite naturally through the pelvic floor. We're not engaging the glutes. So again, I'm making loud breathing noises because I want you to be able to hear what I'm doing, sync the breath in time with the pelvic floor connection. but you don't have to make sound effects. So you get that sensation of the abdominal wall sinking down without dropping back into imprint, without using the glutes. So can we think about, again, those sit bones sitting away from each other, breathing in. Breathe out and imagine you're drawing the sit bones closer together. Breathe in. And breathe out. And again, even when you focus your attention on the pelvic floor, you might then still be aware that you've got that connection in the abdominal wall, because the two things should happen together. So just a couple more breaths. Breathe in. Breathe out. You've got that sensation of drawing up. Now actually, I told a lie when I said a couple more breaths, because I've got another image for you. I want you to imagine, again, sit bone to sit bone, that we have a bellows inside our body. You know the old pointed bellows that they used to use to light the fire, to heat up a fire. So if you can imagine your sit bones are the handles of the bellows, and that when you breathe out, you squeeze those handles together and we get smaller here, and it pushes the air out through your mouth. Breathe in, fill up the bellows. Breathe out, close with your hands as you're bringing those sit bones together. So if that movement helps you, then use your hands as well. Breathe out. Yeah, and again, I'm breathing loud. I want you to be able to hear me breathing. You don't have to make all that noise. So we've also got that visualization of a bellows working, and hopefully again you'll notice that I am not tilting backwards and forwards, I'm not squeezing with my bottom, my lower body stays relaxed. So these are internal muscles, deep muscles, diaphragm, deep abdominals, pelvic floor, all working together. So they are ways that you can consciously work your pelvic floor. The next couple are ways that you can unconsciously work your pelvic floor. So we're going to do some knee drops, and knee drops, because of movement at the hip, the adductor muscles are connected to the same fascia as the pelvic floor, so it's just allowing you to work the pelvic floor in a different way. It can be totally unconscious. So can we have the thighs parallel? You can bring them together if that helps you. Take a breath in, and as you breathe out, get that connection, yeah, and then breathe in, lower the knee. Breathe out, draw back. Let's change legs. Breathe in, lower the knee. Breathe out, draw back. Knees come together. So as I lower the right knee, left leg stays still. Breathe out, draw back. Breathe in, lower. Now I'm breathing into lower. I'm not relaxing as such. So when I lower that leg, it doesn't go flop. Yeah, my pelvis doesn't move, this leg doesn't move. So as always, we're thinking about stability, and we're getting some nice pelvic floor work at the same time as mobilising the hip, a little bit of work on the adductor brevis. So there's one of our exercises that we do a lot, which also has the double benefit of working the pelvic floor. So coming back to the top, and just have a little rock backwards and forwards, just release your back just in case that's uncomfortable. And as we come onto one side, so knees together, just slide your feet across, slide your bottom across and come round. If you are comfortable to have your arm extended, then have your arm extended. If you're not, as long as your head's not forward here, you can pop it in your hand, or you can pop a cushion underneath your head and just bring that arm forward out of the way. So another exercise that works your pelvic floor very similar to the last one, clam position, heels together. Body is in a long line from my ear through my shoulder and lumbar spine to my hip, and I'm hitched in this position because my waist is flattened. So what I want to do is push that top hip further away and lift under the waist. So again, unilateral, one leg goes up and down, breathing out. So if you can focus on the breath and think, breathing out on exertion, so breathe out as you lift, and visualise on that out breath that we get smaller and get bigger. Get smaller, draw in. And if you can focus as you breathe out on that diaphragm being pushed up relaxing up, then this diaphragm working, then the other diaphragm's working as well. And breathe in, and breathe out, and breathe in. So I'm finding that even though I'm not focusing on isolating the pelvic floor and I'm not putting a lot of attention into my pelvic floor, because I've got attention to my breathing, I can feel my pelvic floor working. So that's one. Okay, now we've got another one that you can do in lateral. So just remember, if you've got any hip issues, be careful with your range of movement in this next exercise. And if your hips are not comfortable, first of all, if your bottom hip is uncomfortable, you can put your pad underneath your hip. And if the range of movement is too big for your top hip, just don't do this one. So first option is just to place the ball between my knees and connect the abdominal wall, keep that hollow under the waist, exhale, squeeze the top knee into the bottom knee. Breathe in, release. Yeah. So again, connecting the abdominals, breathing in, ball fills up, belly fills up, breathe out. Yeah, maybe think about that bellows as if the sit bone's moving apart. Breathe out, get that visualization of the sit bones moving closer together. So that's one level of this exercise. Here's another level. I'm going to straighten my bottom leg in line with my body. I'm going to bring my circle in front of and slightly lower than the bottom hip and put the top knee, just above the top knee on it. Yeah. So again, shoulders stable, hips stacked. Take a breath. Breathe out. Think about that. Again, that bellows, or even you think like a tube of toothpaste, you're squeezing from the bottom, toothpaste comes out the top, and just very lightly press. And breathe in. So again here, we're working adductor brevis on the surface, but if we move a little deeper, we're working pelvic floor, deep abdominals. Breathe in. It's not a big movement. Breathe out. And again, if you haven't got a circle, you could pop your ball on a cushion or a block. If you've got a hip replacement, you don't want to be right down here. Yeah. So if you have a hip replacement, just make sure that knee is hip height. And again, if you've got a ball, ideally a bigger ball than this, you can get some work in there as well. But this is slightly too closed. It wants to be higher up. So coming onto your front. And again, if your hip bones are uncomfortable, or your pubic bone is uncomfortable on the mat, pop your pad underneath. Otherwise, if your head is uncomfortable, your neck is uncomfortable, pop a cushion under your forehead. And I'm just going to put my hands under my forehead, and with the feet hip distance apart, all we're going to do is a little bit of gluteal bracing, and strong glutes, strong adductors, all important for that pelvic floor. But I don't want you to focus on your pelvic floor, I want you to focus on your glutes and your abdominals. Take a breath. As you breathe out, think about that bellows, closing, that tube of toothpaste, and engage the thighs and the glutes, squeeze and release. Now, just do that a couple more times. Connect the thighs, connect the glutes. As you connect the glutes, can you get that sensation of lifting, as if you're pulling the pelvic floor towards the crown of your head? And release. So again, if you've got piriformis issues, just come to neutral here. You don't have to go into external rotation. We're not moving the spine, we're not moving the pelvis, but what I'd like you to focus on is that sensation of lifting underneath the abdominal wall. So we engage and squeeze and release. Yeah. So again, we know there's lots of progressions from this, but because we're just looking at the pelvic floor at the moment and exercises where we can use the pelvic floor without having to think about it too hard, we're keeping at these levels. Breathe in, you expand. Breathe out, the waist gets smaller. Think about that sensation of the sit bones coming closer together. And release one more time. Now what we're going to do, for the sake of balance, is go over onto the other side. So I'm just going to have a quick spin round. Don't spin too quickly. Make sure that you can reach your small equipment. And going back for now, come into a straight line, bend both knees. So again, if you have a hip replacement, this is quite a good alternative because this top knee is level with the hip, bottom knee is level with the hip, so we're not coming across the centre line. Prep level, take a breath. Breathe out, connect and squeeze. Breathe and release. And again, breathe out, squeeze. Now the nice thing about this position, again a good thing about this position, is that your pelvic floor's not got any gravity or any weight on it, so you might well feel that in this position you can actually feel your pelvic floor working. And again, you can also feel your sitting bones, so if you want to get a landmark where you should be feeling, sit bone, and imagine you're drawing away from the fingers of the top hand towards the bottom sit bone. And release. Breathe out, squeeze. Now again, that's your prep level, or level if you've got a hip replacement. If you're comfortable, that's above the knee joint, the circle is vertical. It is vertical, it doesn't look it on there. And bottom leg is straight. Connect the abdominals. If you're struggling to balance, you can bend that knee and you can put a pad under your hip. So breathing in, breathe out, connect and lightly squeeze. Don't worry too much about moving this foot around. Try and keep your shin roughly vertical. Breathing in, breathe out, connect and squeeze. So again, we've got that sensation. Breathe in, pelvic floor drops down. Breathe out and visualize it lifting up. Not the hip lifting up, not the knee drawing up. Yeah, so keep that nice and still. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. Fantastic. One more time. And relax there. Fabulous. So, popping those down, coming back up into all fours position. Just to finish with, again in that all fours position, I want you to think about coming back into shell stretch, only as comfy as far as your knees are comfortable, and visualise those pelvic floor muscles lengthening and relaxing, and then come back up into all fours. Visualise the pelvic floor contracting, imagine the sit bones getting closer together. So we go away and breathe out, breathe in and breathe out. So again, got that bellows sensation. Breathe in, fill up, breathe out, imagine the sit bones coming together. Breathing in and breathe out and breathe in and breathe out. And again, as long as you're comfortable and that doesn't create any discomfort or worsen any discomfort, then you can do pelvic floor exercises every day, and there's no problem with doing that little cycle of exercises. They're going to be working other muscle groups as well. They're going to be conditioning the deep abdominals, and it's quite relaxing to focus on your breath and focus on your pelvic floor because it gives you something else to think about. It takes you away from anything that's stressing you out. So again, 10 or 15 minutes of nice, gentle, flowing pelvic floor exercises you could do every day. You could do more than once. So I hope that's been useful and I hope you've enjoyed it.